Hi everyone. Thank you for joining in. We'll just start in about 5 minutes. Thanks.
Hi, Prerna.
Hello, sir.
Has everyone joined?
No, sir. Anish and Dheerya is yet to join.
Okay.
And P.S. Roy.
P.S. Roy has not joined?
No, not yet. Okay. He's left.
Okay. I think Anish has also joined.
Oh, I think everyone's joined in.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Sanjay bhai. How are you?
Hi, Chandra. How are you? I'm absolutely good.
Good. Office?
Office, very much in office. The courts are closed, so we are a bit more relaxed, I guess.
Very good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
I'm Roy.
Good evening.
P.S. Roy.
Hi, Mr. Roy. Good evening. Hi, Dilip bhai.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Piyush is also there.
Hey, good evening to you.
Hi, good evening, Piyush.
Hi, good evening, Piyush.
आणि लोक
Pranay?
Good afternoon, CB.
Good afternoon. Yeah.
Rather evening. Mandvi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Islam matters.
We'll wait for a minute or two, then we will start. I think participants are joining, so just few minutes. With the permission of all the panelists, we will record this webinar. Hope it is all right.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Thanks.
This meeting is being recorded.
Manvi, we can start now.
A very good evening to everyone joining in today. I'm Prerna Shah and I'm a Senior Research Associate at iForest. I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining in today to discuss the interlinked issues of forest fires, climate change, and tendu patta. We shall begin with opening remarks by Mr. Chandrabhushan, who is the CEO and President of iForest. This shall be followed by a short presentation by my colleagues Manvi Singh, who's the program lead for energy and climate change, and Praveen Kumar, who's a consultant for us. The presentation shall disseminate findings from our ongoing research on the interlinkages between tendu patta practices and forest fires and its impact in terms of burnt area and emissions. This shall be followed by a panel discussion. And our panelists for this evening are P.S. Roy, who's a former director at the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, who's also been advising us on this project, and we are very grateful for him for this. We have Anish Andheria, who is the president at the Wildlife Conservation Trust. We have Dilip Gode, who's executive director at the Vidarbha Nature Conservation Society. And we have Piyush Dogre, who's a senior environmental specialist at the World Bank. We also have Sanjay Upadhyay, who is a Supreme Court advocate. So our moderator for this session is Mr. Chandrabhushan, and closing remarks shall be given by Pranay Lal, who's a senior technical advisor at the International Union Against Lung Disease and Tuberculosis. Thank you all for joining in today. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Chandrabhushan for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Prerna, and I'm really happy to see this extremely interesting group of people who have joined today as panelists. So first of all, thanks to all the panelists. I would like to thank my colleague Mandvi, our colleague Praveen, and you, Prerna, for organizing this, first of all, for doing this very interesting study, as well as for organizing this webinar. Now, folks, everyone talks about forest fire. Forest fire, the buzz around forest fire starts from February onwards. And you are likely to see newspaper articles on forest fires, starting from Uttarakhand. And before monsoon, you will start reading news article about forest fire in Chhattisgarh, Orissa, and Jharkhand. So forest fire has been in news for quite some time. And there's reason for this. Now there is enough data to show that forest fire is increasing in many parts of the world. Interestingly, in some part of the world, it is actually reducing. In India, for example, forest fire is increasing. If you look at the data for last 2 decades, there has been significant increase in the incidence of forest fire. For example, if you take 2016-17 data, there were about 40,000 forest fire incidents. By last year, I think it was close to 53,000. So we are seeing increasingly forest fire numbers are increasing. Our analysis shows that even the burnt area, the amount of forest land that is getting burnt in forest fire is also increasing. Now, there are many factors why forest fire is increasing. Obviously, as someone who works on climate change, I do see a clear attribution of global warming in forest fire. I'm not the only person talking about it. Any scientist who is looking at the interplay of surface temperature, high wind speed, and low moisture will tell you these are the perfect conditions for forest fire. And this is what global warming is doing. Your surface temperature and air temperature is increasing. You have moisture deficit in large areas before monsoon, and then you have high wind. Now you put all these three things together, you have perfect condition for forest fire. And this perfect condition exists in India from Himalayas to central, eastern India, part of southern India. In fact, the forest fire areas or the susceptible areas are increasing, have increased over a period of time. Now, this is one part of the story. But there's another part of the story which is known to people. And that part of the story is that a large majority of forest fire is caused by humans, either intentionally or accidentally. So climate change is creating condition for forest fire, but that match is being lit by humans, either because of some economic practices or accidentally. Now, this study is looking at one economic practice, which is tendu patta collection. And is there a linkage between the practice of tendu patta collection and forest fire in 3 states of India? And we are looking at Maharashtra. We have looked at Maharashtra, we have looked at Orissa, and we have looked at Chhattisgarh. These 3 states produce about 1/3 of tendu in the country. And the forest fire incidents are also increasing in these 3 states. Of course, it is also increasing in other states, but we chose these 3 states as for our pilot study. So we have the study essentially with the help of many people. And of course, Prerna introduced you to Dr. P.S. Roy, Praveen, Mandvi, everyone came together and helped us to do this study, to see what is the contribution of tendu collection practices to forest fire. We also estimated burnt area, but more than that, we tried to estimate the carbon emission. What is the contribution of carbon emission from tendu areas forest fire in these 3 states? So it's going to be very interesting. The findings are quite, when I saw this, I was very, excited with what we found. So without any delay, I would like you also to get excited about this study. And I'll request my colleague Mandvi to start the presentation and tell us how she has done it, what she has found, and what is the way ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CD, and very good evening to all the participants. My screen is visible?
Yes, it is visible. Yeah. You can do full screen, Mandvi.
Yes, I did. Praveen and I will be making this very short presentation on our analysis around forest fires and the tendu patta collection activity. Praveen is a postdoc student at the IIT Kharagpur, and he has been supporting us with this project in the capacity of a consultant. The background to this study is in fact something that CB's kind of elaborated. But yeah, broadly the rising incidences of forest fires in India and its direct and significant impact on climate change. And then we get into exploring, where tendu patta activity kind of fits into all this. I'll not spend too much time on this, but just to sort of iterate, the need for climate action at this point, it cannot be overstressed. And 2 recent IPCC reports have kind of made it very, very clear that at this point, it's a now or never kind of situation as far as climate action is concerned. And in this context, forests and forest soil kind of becomes very, very relevant. And as far as the Indian government is concerned, there is a lot of stress on afforestation, and there is a target of creating, additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons in the next decade. But there is a big gap when it comes to taking action against degradation. And that's where forest fires and the rising incidences of forest fires become a very important policy concern. Now, we know that 35% of the forest areas, forest cover in India is assessed to be prone to forest fires and to various degrees. And recent studies have also indicated in the past 2 decades, the forest fire incidences have gone up by 10-fold. So this is a serious concern, and there are ecosystems where fires can play an important role in regeneration, etc. But mostly in Indian context, studies have found that forest fires are principal cause of degradation, especially in dry deciduous forested regions of Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, and Chhattisgarh. So this issue of forest fires goes, it has multiple dimensions of climate change as well as ecology and biodiversity impact. Like CD said, it is largely understood that 90 to 95% of these forest fires are human-made, and available evidence kind of based on media reports and also acknowledged by ground level studies and by government reports. It indicates very clearly that there is an acknowledgement that these fires are being kindled for supporting or facilitating the growth of NTFPs in forests, and particularly the name of Mahua and Tendu comes up quite frequently in these reports. So far, what we found was that there is very limited kind of systemic inquiry into this understanding these causes behind forest fires. And so our research, we decided to focus on tendu, because it is a very, very prominent NTFP in India. And there is a tradition of using fires for supporting its collection. And just on tendu a little bit, tendu is a tree which is mostly found in India's dry deciduous forests. And the leaves of this tree are used for making bidis, which is the commonly smoked cigarette, hand-rolled, handmade cigarette of very commonly smoked in India. We're talking about an estimated 300,000 metric tons of tendu leaves being collected every year in India, which is being used to produce over 4,000 billion sticks of tendu, of bidi. And Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh are major producers. They account for almost 60% of the total production. And then 4 states of Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Odisha, and Maharashtra account for another 30%. So now this practice of tendu collectors and contractors using fires to cut back the young exposed shoots of tendu plant to stimulate its growth for better fresh green leaves for good quality bidi making. This has been going on for a while, and like I said, it's often reported, but it's not documented in a very procedural manner. And we understand that these fires are essentially set from January onwards, but mostly these are found to be concentrated during the dry seasons of April and May. And while mostly these are intended to be small and sort of located just in the region where Tendupatra is grown, but it tends to often go beyond its boundaries because these are dry seasons and the moisture content in the fire is low. And also then there is the issue of negligence, etc. Now, like CD said, these news of uncontrolled fires in these states of Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, it's often captured during these months and are often sort of linked to tendu harvesting itself. What has happened at policy level is that the state governments have discouraged it. We have the central and state laws that have set penalties against setting forests on fire, and then there are explicit measures also included for controlling this practice. For instance, the Odisha government every year sets aside a fund for bush cutting instead of burning, for essentially as to discourage use of fires. And in fact, last year in the crop season of 2021, it had disbursed around 35 crores towards bush cutting. Similar support is also available in Madhya Pradesh for bush cutting. But we'll see what the data says in terms of what is the practice despite of these funds. In Maharashtra, very strong measures have been taken. In fact, the government has banned the use of forest fires for tendu back in 2012. And the contractors and Gram Sabhas have been made responsible for controlling these fires. In fact, if a fire breaks in a tendu unit in Maharashtra before the auction date, then the unit is to be withdrawn from auctioning it altogether. And if it breaks after the auction, then the contract itself is cancelled. Now, the data isn't clear on how many cancellations have actually taken place, though we do sort of read in news items that warnings are being issued by forest departments time and again. Now, why did we specifically explore tendu patta and maybe not another NTFP like Mahua? We decided to focus on tendu patta for 2-3 key reasons. Firstly, like I said, it's a very prominent NTFP, which has been which has prospered under government patronage. Until recent deregulation in certain areas in Maharashtra and Odisha, tendu patta has largely been a nationalized produce, which means that state government laws and rules are in place that have helped create a steady market linkage for tendu patta production, and which is not available for any other NTFP, perhaps, as strong. So today it is not only an important output. In fact, for certain state-owned agencies, such as in Maharashtra, such as in particularly Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, it is one of the largest sources of revenue for the state agencies. So produce which is kind of supposedly so polluting, we'll look at what the data says, but if fires are being used to produce an output which is then being supported by the government machinery, so there is a linkage which needs to be explored and understood, and it kind of becomes important to look at why tendu and why not something else which is perhaps then more promising as a maybe medicinal or a commercial NTFP. The second reason is that these leaves are ultimately being used to produce a tobacco product at the end of the day. And we have multiple studies looking at what kind of impact BD consumption has, direct and indirect costs on human health, and even contributing to mortality. There was a study back in 2018 that said that nearly 800 billion was the cost of illnesses and early deaths which were resulting from BD consumption in India. And we're talking about 400 billion sticks consumed annually versus 100 billion cigarettes consumed annually. So that's a huge market and consumption that we're talking about. Lastly, of course, the presence of tendu now itself is an indicator of degraded forests. Because tendu trees were initially, the understory of sal and tree. But now in the image also that you saw, they've largely been reduced to shrubs, and the diversity of the forests has completely been destroyed. So then from that perspective also, exploring this linkage kind of becomes very important. The approach that we've taken for this study is it is already explained a little bit. But basically, we are looking to establish a clear linkage between tendu leaf collection and forest fires, because often it's not openly acknowledged that this is happening. So we wanted to explore what the data is saying, and also assess the impact, particularly in terms of the burnt area, and also some indication on what the CO2 emissions, what is the scale of CO2 emissions that we're talking about. We are focusing on Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, and Odisha, which again, CV's mentioned, it's 36% of the forest fire incidences that took place in the last fire season, and 35% of the tendu leaf collection that typically happens. We are using available satellite data on forest fires, vegetation type, emissions. And then the methodologies or the approaches we've used, the tools we've used are basically related to mapping, statistical tools, some modeling tools, and some back of the envelope also towards the end. So at this point, I think I'll request Praveen to take over and talk about the data and what the results are saying.
Good evening, everyone. So now I'm going to talk about like how we did the analysis and to understand how the patta collection is associated with the forest fires. So for that, as Ma'am was already like mentioned, we collected data like for the fire points and where they are located in this region and what kind of vegetations they have. The data was collected basically from the satellite sources, some organizations such as ISRO's, and also from lab analysis. So we did with this data, as you can see, on the left-hand side is a distribution of tendu sample points. It represents like the locations of the tendu like species in this particular 3 states. Overall, we found out around 615 sample points, in which occurrence was mostly in Odisha, followed by Maharashtra, and then by Chhattisgarh. On the right-hand side, you can see is a distribution of tendu-linked forest fire points. In total, we get around 1,500 points, forest fire points, which is like associated with this distribution of this tendu sample points. So from the time period of 2011 to 21, we got around 788 forest fire points in Odisha, around 550 points in Maharashtra, and 200 points in Chhattisgarh. So basically, this tells us like, how this forest, it gives a first impression of, how forest fire is associated with the presence of tendu in this region. Next one. Yeah. So here we also try to understand like, okay, so these fire points where they are happening, like what kind of vegetations, they are associated with. And we found out that basically with the vegetation type, it was mostly a deciduous kind of vegetation. If you go to state-wise, in Maharashtra, it was deciduous as well as teak mixed deciduous vegetation type, in which these tendu-linked forest fires were happening. In Chhattisgarh, it was mostly moist deciduous and sal forest, in which tendu-related forest fires were happening again. And in Odisha, it was sal mixed moist deciduous and sal mixed deciduous forest type, which was again like responsible for these tendu-related forest fires. And if you look into the left-hand side, it's like it is a trend of like trajectories of tendu-linked forest fires. And here you can see in 2020, during the like pandemic time, the number of these forest fire points dropped in all the 3 states. And then afterwards, like as the economy started and this, we started to bounce back in 2021, the number of these fire points, it increased like drastically in all the 3 states. So, I mean, it tells us that, when during the pandemic time, it's suppressed. But again, once all the things started to change and things started to move on, this number has increased. Next one. So we try to also understand like how this tendu, like presence of tendu and forest fire, are they related or not in the 3 states or overall? And during our analysis, we found out that they are highly related with like a correlation coefficient of over in the forest fires and the presence of tendu in the entire region. And if you go into the like state-wise, again, all the 3 states show the very high correlation between forest fires and tendu presence. And out of the 3 states, Odisha state shows a consistent high correlation during the period of 2011 to 2021. Next one. Yeah. So to understand, like we wanted to calculate, how much area this like tendu is like burning because of these forest fires. So we calculated burnt area index. Then we also tried to model. We modeled the distribution of tendu in the study region using Maxent like entropy model. And then in the end, we tried to we identified the potential like species distribution of tendu related to their occurrence of forest fires, and we then calculated their areas, burnt area associated with them. So regarding the burnt area index, we found out around 27,000 square kilometer of area in the three states, which is roughly equivalent to the area of combined area of Tripura and Goa. It's burnt down in this region, which was responsible from all the forest fires. And if we come to the distribution model, we found out that around 53,000 square kilometer of area in the three states, they are highly the highly good site for the tendu's presence, which we modeled through our Maxent model. When we, once we get this two different maps, one is for the burnt area and one with the potential distribution of tendu, we overlaid them together, and we found out that the burnt area, which was responsible for the tendu-related forest fires, and we got around 13,905 square kilometers of area, in which Chhattisgarh is the is represented the highest number of largest number of burnt area in these three states, and followed by Maharashtra and then Odisha. Next one. Yeah. So here we can see overall the three states. Chhattisgarh state has the highest tendu-linked burnt area index for the study period, and out of that, if you look into the Chhattisgarh state in 2017, it has the highest number of burnt area in the burnt area, roughly around the equivalent size of Delhi. The area of Delhi, and roughly the size area equivalent to Delhi, it burnt down in 2017. In Maharashtra, basically in 2012, an area of 855 square kilometers, roughly equivalent to the urban Pune city, it burned down. And in Odisha, particularly in 2021, because this tendu burnt area tendu increased a lot, and over there, around 3 times the size of Bhubaneswar city area got burnt due to this tendu-related forest fires. So, and overall, we also found out that particularly the month of March, April, and May were the major months in which these tendu-related fires they were happening and occurring. Next. Yeah. So, once we get this area, we try to also assess what is the greenhouse gas emission or CO2 emissions from these forest fires. We found out that around 14.2 million ton of CO2, was emitted from these three states in the 2021 period, and it is roughly equivalent to 5.6 million cars in a year, emission from a car in a year. In the three states, Chhattisgarh state has the highest value of CO2 emissions, which are linked to tendu-related forest fires, followed by Maharashtra and then Odisha. So again here we see, if you look into the month-wise, it was mostly March, April, and May month, which was responsible for the CO2 emissions related to the forest fires. Next.
Thank you, Praveen, for taking us through the analysis. So broadly, that's the data that we've analyzed and processed. It's indicating a wide use of fires for stimulating tendu growth. This is simple kind of back of the envelope extrapolation, but we're talking about, based on the data from the three states, an estimated 60,000 square kilometers of forest area being burnt on account of tendu collection in the past decade, which is nearly equivalent to the size of Himachal Pradesh, for reference. And even in a single year, the highest burns were in 2012 and 2021. We're talking about 10,000 square kilometers of area being burnt, again equivalent to the size of the state of Tripura. And even during the COVID year, when the fires were low, we're talking about nearly half the size of Delhi being burned down for tendu patta collection. So we're talking about massive environmental damages, and these are not just local area problems. These are, it's a planetary health issue at this point. And what we find is that central government and state government laws and policies in place have not translated into an impact on the ground in terms of controlling these fires. So definitely there's a need to strengthen the regulatory control But I think even more important at this point is for the policymakers to think about alternative sustainable livelihoods for tendu patta collectors to as a measure to effectively control this contribution towards greenhouse gases. The point is that tendu is a massive employment provider for a large section of forest dependent populations, even though it's a short-term employment. Given the skill sets and the income levels of people who are taking this activity, it is amounting to a substantial contribution to their livelihood. So we're talking about just perhaps 7 million collectors in MP, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha combined. And beyond collection, then there are multiple people involved in processing activities and other associated activities that are getting livelihood from this activity. So any any action against the tendu patta forest fires would have to account for the livelihood of these forest dependent populations. And it's not that these states do not have alternative NTFPs that can be promoted and supported through similar kind of mechanisms that tendu was supported to reach that scale, and perhaps even investments in adding value to these NTFPs for better outcomes for the dependent communities. Our assessment is that given the massive amount of carbon abatement we're talking about from giving up tendu, carbon markets could be tapped into as a good source of investment money, which is required for developing these alternatives. I'll stop at that. I'll let you finish something on the way forward.
Thank you, Mandvi, for this, and Praveen for this very interesting presentation. As I said, and I think you emphasize that point very well, that while on one hand, it is now very well established that we are looking at large forest area being burnt because of this practice of tendu collection. But on the other hand, we are talking about tens of millions of livelihood which is attached to tendu, and we have to find an answer, and the answer will be in livelihood itself. I think first of all we have to accept that there is a problem, and once we have accepted that there is a problem, then we will find answer. And as I said, and that's what I think, Mandvi, you said very well, alternative livelihood has to be the focus if we really want to reduce this forest fire. And I don't think that in today's world where there is such huge awareness on global warming, resources are being put to reduce emissions. Mitigation is a big area where investment is coming. Carbon market can also play an important role in terms of reducing emissions from this practice. Now, all these are very well. It is our part of the story. What we have found, the study that we have done. So thank you very much for presenting that. Now, we want to hear from the panelists. And as I started by saying, we have an extremely interesting group of people, because we have a conservationist, we have someone, who has gone away from tendu to other non-timber forest produce and seen the result, whether leaving tendu is possible or not. We have a former director of Remote Sensing Institute who will tell us about his perception of the methodology for this study. And we have a World Bank expert who has looked at forest fire closely. And lastly, we have a Supreme Court advocate, and as well as actually an avid forester himself, Sanjay, who will tell us the legal aspect of how do we deal with these issues, because states have put in laws to reduce this practice of forest fire. So let me start with Mr. P.S. Roy, who is a former director of Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, for his opening remark. The rules of the game is as follows. We will give you about 5 to 7 minutes of opening remark, and then I will ask one question before I move to the next panelist. So I'll go through this round of opening remarks from panelists and one question from my side. And then in the end, we will open the discussion and we will take questions from the audience. I think this should be all right. So let me now request Mr. P.S. Roy for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chandrabhushan, for giving me opportunity to be here. I really appreciate the presentation made by Mandavi and Praveen. They have made a case that there could be a spatial link between the distribution of tendu patta leaf and forest fire, and emissions of carbon emissions in these areas. Now, some of the uh, background material which has been presented by here has been a part of a study which has been undertaken by Department of Space and Department of Biotechnology for mapping the forest vegetation and understanding the biodiversity potential of the Indian forest. As has been mentioned that 95% of the fires are introduced because of the man-made forest fires. And what we have seen that some of the social practices like shifting cultivation, the non-timber forest produce collection, or also the practices like grass, livestock grazing. These are some of the social practices which been factors. But one of the dominating factors has emerged as a climate change. Climate change in last 30 years has shown the increase of 25 to 30% of average forest fire incidences in Indian forest. The main reasons are number of dry days, enhanced dry days during the fire period, that is sometime in January to May, the desiccation process of Indian forest floor, and also some of the factors leading to upwards movement of forest fire in Indian Himalayas. Now, studies also have found that El Nino years matching with the fire period also has a impact on the enhanced forest fires. Now, these factors complicate the things in the forest, especially which are facing already degradation because of the various reasons. Some of the consequences which will be seeing in future is the regeneration of the forest floor, the soil degradation, especially the loss of organic matter, besides having emissions because of the forest fire. Now, this study opens up a very important discussion, especially linking the social practices and incidents of forest fires. I have some of the experiences. I can tell you that the forest fires has been increasing in India. It's a many time on average number of 25,000 fire occurrences during fire season. Now it has some of the worst years have seen about 40 to 45,000 forest fire locations. Now this is a very serious concern on emissions and also in the condition of forest. I think I will stop here and give an opportunity for some of the questions to be answered.
Dr. Roy, the first question I have for you is, you have been with Remote Sensing Institute for a long time. What could be the next step of research agenda on forest fire which our space agencies can take up. I know that MODIS is, we are able to calculate number of forest fire. There's MODIS data, and there are some other data that is available. But what is the new research agenda considering climate change, social practices, and increasing forest fire that our institution should be looking at?
Okay, see, basically MODIS is a coarse resolution satellite which provides you 1 kilometer and in some spectral channels 650, 500-meter ground resolution. That is, it picks up not actually forest fire, but it picks up the heat islands, warmer pixels in spatially. And obviously wherever the forest fire is there dominates, you have a warmer pixels. Now, major issue is that can we increase the spatial resolution? Spatial resolution means detail of the ground signature which we are recording, and also temporal resolution, revisit capacity of the satellites, which provides me a monitoring trend of forest fire, and it's a spreading trend of forest fire. There is going to be a very interesting satellite in coming years, where from geostationary platform, such observations can be made. That means will be continuously looking at the same point with 50-meter ground resolution. And ISRO has already planned such satellites. And these satellites, they will provide us in a hyperspectral domain where about 160 channels will be there. In nutshell, there is a requirement of increased spatial resolution and temporal resolution, and ISRO is already working towards it to provide such kind of a data.
Okay, thank you. First of all, an announcement to all the attendees. This is a very cross-cutting issue, and therefore you have an opportunity to ask a lot of questions from the panelists. Please go in Q&A session, put your questions, and I'll ensure that that is answered by our panelists. If not, they will respond back to you later. But please, it's a very extremely cross-cutting issue, and you must, you should ask questions from our panelists. Now, let me go back to now Anish. Anish is the president of Wildlife Conservation Trust for his opening remark. Anish.
Thank you, Chandra. A very good presentation, Mandvi and Praveen. And it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. So I will, as an opening, because a lot of work has been done, there are a lot of facts and figures that have been presented. And I just want to kind of go into a micro level view of biodiversity in general, because why are fires dangerous for central India? So we must remember that central India is a very, very important part of the country, because several rivers that irrigate millions of hectares of India are born in the central Indian landscape. So when you say central India, you are looking at the Satpura range precisely, but you can also start looking at the Vindhyas, because that also is part of it. And Satpuras are an extremely important land formation running across the width of the country, and they provide catchment for innumerable rivers. So forests in central India have a huge bearing on the quantity and quality of water that the peninsular India above the Western Ghats provides. And so when you talk of forest degradation, you have a direct impact on precipitation. You also have direct impact on the biodiversity that goes down, because you must understand that fires in India is not a recent phenomenon. Tendu is a very ancient business. A lot of it, the governments are trying to regularize it. Not even 10 years ago, this was absolutely a gray market, and a lot of people have become millionaires being in this business. So there were fires related to tendu for many, many decades. So the central Indian landscape, especially those Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra region, has been exposed to these fires for decades. What is changing, like Mr. Roy is saying, is that climate change is adding a very, very dangerous layer to this fire, that the fires are not only more intense, but they are far more frequent. It is very difficult to control them. So in the past, it was possible for the forest department with their minimal facilities to try and fight those fires. I'm not saying they were very successful in it, but there was hope now. And that can be seen from the number of forest guards and watchers dying every year or in getting injured every year because of fire. So climate change is only making this issue of fire extremely, extremely dangerous for biodiversity in general. So what does happen? When you have a constant cycle of fire, it reduces the productivity of the forest. That means the vegetation in the forests gets impacted. Why? Because there are some fire-loving plants, and most plants don't like fire. Which are those fire-loving plants? These are, some of them are native, but a large proportion of these are invasive species, alien invasives like lantana, like parthenium, like eupatorium, like there are several others. So when fire comes in, it destroys the recruitment process in the forest, which is very important. It starts having an impact on the recruitment of native species, and you have a profuse recruitment of fire-loving plants which are not edible for most species. So it is reducing the productivity at two levels. One is by directly eliminating, B, by replacing native edible flora with non-edible alien species. It also then has an impact on biodiversity, and biodiversity and forests are extremely interlinked. People think of climate change and they think of forest degradation as the main reason, but another important layer is that of biodiversity. So all those areas where the biodiversity has gone down have a lesser chance of fighting back when it comes to climate change, because the overall biodiversity of, say, the central Indian landscape, when it goes down, there is no emigration possible of certain fire non-resistant species of animals. As a result, pollinators, germinator and dispersers vanish from a forest. Once that happens, even if you take the fire away for a few years, that forest will not regenerate into its original form. It will be in some form which is depleted in resources, and it will look green from satellite. So when you look at forest cover, you should also do the ground truthing to see what species there is, and you will find that obviously currently with MODIS you are looking at temperature, so there is no ambiguity on that. But to see the quality of forest also, if you just look at your vegetation, it will give you a wrong picture. Everything that is green is not good. So that's one thing. Fire also has a huge impact on soil erosion, because it removes a lot of important nutrients, especially fungi from the top surface of the soil, making the soil more progressively granular. And because of that, every time that there is rain, even if it rains well, you will have that topsoil going away. And we know that it takes 1,000 years for 6 inches of soil to form, even in a place like Western Ghats. And so the impact of fire is far outnumbering in terms of money for the government than what meets the eye, because it is depleting the forest of the regenerative power. And remember, 60% of Indians plus 60% are farmers, and 85% of those are subsistence farmers, and they today are dependent on surface water largely for taking at least one crop. The underground water that is being tapped is giving them an option of second crop, but the first crop itself doesn't do well, and India will be in for a crisis. So when you look at this central Indian landscape, you must look at it from the impact it is going to have on biodiversity and the impact it's going to have on livelihoods, which will have a huge impact on the social and the unrest that you will see in this area. And many of these fire-prone areas you will see, if you map the red areas of India, which means the areas where there is insurgency, where there is some amount of naxalism, you will see that these typically are also the regions where there is a lot of unrest in people. People are not happy, and so they are easily maneuvered into directions which are not legally accepted. So you must understand that social unrest, fire, biodiversity, climate change is all connected. That's all I wanted to say. I will take more questions later.
Thanks, Anish. Anish, you actually picked up a point which is very important. 2 years back, when Australia was going through massive fire, eucalyptus crown fire, and the images were coming from Australia, I approached few foresters to understand how prepared we are as a country to deal with crown fire, because over a period of time, eucalyptus has been planted widely in this country, initially as a roadside plant, but then in farm forestry, also as plantation in forest. So, and the answer at that point of time I got was that we will do fire line, we will include local community. I was not very satisfied with the answer I got from foresters about our ability to deal with large fire. What is your sense? Are we prepared, or is it that we need to do a lot in terms of preparing ourselves from the next big fire that is happening, but is going to increase in the future?
So first of all, we must know that Central India, because there are ground fires every year, many of our areas burn twice in a year. You don't have excess combustible material really. So therefore, the fires remain ground fires. But with climate change, and as the moisture content in the trees as well as on the soil change, and as the flora composition changes, our fires are going to be progressively more canopy fires as well. So the fires that were just burning the top, the inflammable material on the ground can now start engulfing larger areas. Also remember that when the fire size is also extremely important when it comes to this difference between the ground fire and the canopy fire, because once you have large areas burning, the ambient temperature of that is so high that and also if it's an undulating terrain, so if it's a flat terrain, it's easier to handle. But if it's undulating terrain, then fires can really progress. Once they are on the slope, then nothing can really stop them. It will only self-extinguish them when they have burnt everything that is there to burn. So to answer your question in one line, the Forest Department is not equipped currently financially also to be able to combat this. The second answer, another added answer is that even if they were equipped, it is not possible to fight these fires. The best way to fight these fires is to stop them from happening. It is impossible when you see those very jazzy images of helicopters going, carrying some large loads of fire. Everybody sitting here, Dilip, Mr. Roy, everybody will tell you that it is good as a news item. It really doesn't help, and it definitely won't help India. And India is not capable of doing this. So I think ground fires are no longer going to be ground fires. B, even with ground fires, the department is not equipped. So when it hits the canopy, it is impossible to do anything. And so I'm really fearing that if we don't move away from the current practice, and this also, and I will answer, maybe there are questions later, that the financial interest of the government should also be de-linked with things like tendu patta, which are anyways injurious to health. And most communities in India are inflicted by addictions to either BDs or to alcohol. And if you talk to any woman in any of these villages, then you will hear them say that we want our men to be taken away from these practices. So there is a serious case of really rethinking the interests that, and even if you regularize it, you are basically allowing people to deplete the forest to make a product which is going to create cancer to millions of people.
Thank you, Anish. I think our colleague Pranay, who has been a lot of support for this study, will exactly say what you have said, and he has been saying that for a long time. That it is not only about environment; it is also about health. So this triangulation of environment, health, and social issues must be understood, because we generally talk in isolation. We only talk about environment, or we only talk about health, or we only talk about social issues. So thank you very much for that. Now, I will now request Dilip ji for his opening remarks, and then we will take it forward from there. Dilip ji.
Thank you, Chandra ji. This is a well-known fact that how this forest fire impacting adversely on the entire ecosystem and greatly hampering even the livelihoods. Because in Central Indian ecosystem, many poor people, they are heavily depend on forest resources for their livelihoods because they are having a very small land holding. Not many of them, they are not having land holding more than half an acre of land or the 1 acre of land. And for the rest of the period when this Kharif come after the Kharif season, they heavily depend on forest resources and particularly three kind of sources, which are the major sources having commercial demand, particularly bamboo, tendu, and mawa flowers and mawa seeds. And this first comes in tendu leaves. The thing is that uh, as we are talking about curative management and preventive management, it's a fault in the management. We always go for the curative management. What about the preventive management? If this kind of forest fires, they are visible, their impact is visible, how it is addressing very adversely this climate change, and so also it is impacting on the erosion of the soil. So erosion of the soil resulting into recharging of the groundwater storages and also impacting on the yield of the entire area. When we started working with community-based forest management, even earlier to this 2006 Forest Right Act and prior to that joint forest management, etc., we started as a wildlifer. Then we came to know that it is impacting very adversely on the habitat of the animal. We always talk about the higher fauna, flora. What about the higher, lower fauna? Number of insects, number of plants, they are getting vanished, they are getting destroyed because of the forest. And the entire regeneration process, it is stopped. And we are spending huge amount on plantations. But what about this regeneration system? It is made failed. It got failed. And then when we started working with community management, for it to be managed by community, then there was a question from the community. Because why there is no availability of the trees of Tindu patta having fruiting? Because all old generation people started asking this question: where those trees are gone? Those are not producing fruits of temru foods to these because of the continued pruning of the uh, forest bushes. Those are not going up into a good grown tree forest. And second thing, this forest fire. Then we started thinking how to manage the entire system because people were interested about getting more yield, and to get the more yield, we have to manage forest in a very sustainable manner. So sustainable management of the forest means people first complain about production forestry objective of the forest management, which was actually declared by the government of India in the forest policy in 1988, that now we have to move from production forestry to conservation management forestry, conservation oriented forestry. Now after this 1990, today we are in 2022. What is the status of this conservation oriented management of the forest system? Again, we are going to support that system, which is giving more yield in the form of commercial profits. Whatever management is being done for super Tindu patta is being collected. System is always protecting the interest of the bidi patta purchasers. Because bidi patta purchaser, they want to get more flesh, they want to get more tender leaves. So forest fires are there. Definitely forest fire. And how many kinds of convictions we have seen? There is a condition in Maharashtra tender document. Pruning is allowed. Why pruning is allowed even in the condition of today's conservation management system? And conservation management principles are agreed by the government of India in their document presented before the parliament in the form of forest policy. Even then, we are not leaving those restrictive practices, and again we are making that a condition in the tender document that yes, the trader or the bidder for the Tindu patta will be allowed go for the pruning. Every year pruning is allowed, and result is that bush won't grow into a tree and can't produce any fruit, and there are no fruit, there will be no seeds at all. Seeds won't go to soil, and there will be no germination. So when we started tendu patta in 2013, that is the first case in entire country with 12 villages. Now we are grown up to 175 villages. It's a collective management. So ban first pruning of the tendu patta. People said that we don't want that kind of any production which is being catalyzed because of different kind of destructive practices. Let forest grow with whatever requirements of the natural systems. Natural system production should be there, and then cut those practices which are destructing entire forest and also impacting very badly on the wildlife habitat. Because many areas in central India, good forests are required for even providing good cover to wild animals as a good habitat. And then we stop cutting bush. Second thing, people themselves, they come out this idea to control fire in their area where forest, in case of their forest, people go and control the fire. And particularly in many areas where we have been working in villages, they do not go for any kind of forest, and then to address commercial requirement of the thing is that regeneration is we have seen good kind of luxurious regeneration of the forest. Around 600 to 1200 species per hectare appeared as a species in because of those two practices. My question is that forest department knows all those things, how many kind, because there are the system from central controlling agency to respective divisions of the forest to give them forest fire alerts. Every year we are getting those incidences and recorded in the form of number of incidences. What about this preventive management? And then only government can control fires just because of the making financial provision or getting some new technology equipments to control the fire. It won't. It can't happen. As said by Anish, I agree totally. That fire should be controlled at the level of the initiation of the fires, and that too at the ground level. And many people, many villages, they are in central Indian ecosystem. They are heavily depending on forest system, and people honor these conservation practices of the forest, provided there should be a good dialogue in between government and the people together. If there is no good dialogue, there should be a real kind of participatory management. And this participatory management of forest would definitely lead to good kind of yield. But harvesting of the yield should be based on the good sustainable harvesting practices, and those to be designed, because ban this kind of collection or ban that kind of collection, that cannot be the solution. If it is said that there should be alternate resources, what kind of alternate resources we have been talking about? There are major kind of two resources, one mahua flower and second tendu patta. Those are the major resources. What kind of alternate we are talking about? We have to go for intensification of the agriculture. Intensification of the agriculture again require availability of the water. Availability of the water again require addressing storages of groundwater and surface water, and that entire management of the water system, we require good forest cover. Good forest cover connects to get good kind of harvest of water, and good kind of harvesting of the water will definitely increase the storage, groundwater storage and surface water. That will lead to definitely providing good kind of water resource for more irrigation. In my area, it's a paddy area. Only we are getting to work for 125 days. What about rest of the period, Rabi area? What about the summer period? That is to be only possible. That will be only possible if there will be adequate resource of water, availability of the water will be there. And second thing, sustainable, conservation-oriented management of the ecosystem. People definitely would honor these kind of conservation practices once they feel that if those forest produce, they are giving us good kind of economic support and good kind of livelihood. In my area, where earlier people used to get around 5 to 10,000 of rupees per family in a season, now they are getting 25 to 50,000, 60,000 rupees in season. One family getting mahua flowers and they are selling for 25 to 50,000. In the tendu season, they are getting the same kind of profit. So approximately 75,000 to 1.25 1,25,000 This is the average income per family in the area where people have only meager possession of land, not more than 1 acre. So this we need to understand what resources people have there in their possession, what their personal resources, what kind of common resources are there in their possession, and how we can connect personal kind of resources for their livelihood together with forest resources and other common resources. Then only we can address the entire this impact of and the adverse impacts of forest fire. Definitely forest fire has to be brought into control, but that will be possible only through people's participation and to make management at the ground level together. Forest department and people should work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilipji. Dilipji, I just have a small question from you. There is a lot of case study that is now being documented on other NTFP. Bamboo, for example, in your area is becoming a big source of income. But also in Odisha, for example, there is now a huge processing of custard apple, chironji, and there are other NTFP which never had a good market linkage. So apart from mahua, tendu, in central India, isn't other NTFPs also something that we should really explore and provide value addition?
Yes, there are a number of forest produce having high value and being used in medicines and other commercial purposes. The thing is that there is the marketing chain. Marketing chain. Now in mahua case, there is the minimum support price of rupees 30-32 per kg, but in marketing, traders are there to purchase for 40 rupees. If the mahua is stored in the godown properly, that price will go up to 70 rupees per kg. But we need to have storages, godowns, everything. And what about lag? There are custard apple, then wood apple, then jamun, harra beda. But many people, they are coming to say that we are there to buy the products. Even about this crude botanicals, used as the medicine. When I was working in Bastar for making biodiversity plan in 2000 to 2003, we recorded collection and sale of the NTP was to the tune of 500 crore per annum. Unrecorded sale was to the tune of 1,500 crore. What about this? All Bicholi, they are having their purchase out center in every village. The moment you poor people go there, they would get immediate cash payment. Where is the system of government? Can people wait for you? Because harra beda minimum support price, that is for 18 rupees. And then they want money immediately for some urgency. And that poor tribal go to the grocery shop and sell for distress sale for 10 rupees a kg. And then grocery shop give immediate proceed of the sale amount. There is no system. So we need to establish a system. We need to make certain agency work for those things. And then alternative livelihood will definitely depend on sustainable and conservation-oriented management practices of the forest and water system.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, this is the right time to bring Piyush. Piyush had actually, led a very important study that World Bank did on forest fire. So, Piyush, for your opening remarks, and then I will go to Sanjay for his overall, impression on this issue, as well as the legal remedies and cases that deals with this issue. So Piyush, please.
Thanks, Chandra. I think thank you very much to Mandvi and Praveen. I particularly was very much interested in the last one slide and the last slide. And the last one slide talks about climate change and the emissions. And the last slide gives you, clear idea that where you are going from this, and we have done this study in the World Bank on forest fire management systems in India and how this can be strengthened. But I don't want to concentrate on that study because it's particularly now we're talking about NTFP and their impacts on the forest fire. And I think the study has rightly captured, the study has come out very clearly that, tendu patta is one of that, or the NTFP, which links to these activities is one of the cause. And this has been established in our study, and this is coming out very clearly in your study now, based on the satellite presentations which Praveen has clearly presented. I think the two important reasons when we were doing our study was that, one was negligence, very clearly. And second was, a collection of non-timber forest produce, and where not only Mahua and Tendu, but there were other related NTFPs like fodder, honey, mushroom, seeds and medicinal plants, charcoal and other things. These were also included as part of, which can cause fire and can bring in fire. So there was no question that, these are not, these are directly linked to the forest fire. No question comes, definitely these needs to be contained, and I agree with Dilip ji and Roy Saab. India has very good fire detection system, as far as detection system is concerned. They started with MODIS, and at least the cycle of the forest fire, which goes from prevention, detection, suppression, and post-fire management, at least in the detection side, we were slightly better. And as Chandra pointed out, next step is how to strengthen that system. And that is, a lot of work is now going on. El Nino may not have that kind of impact, but there are other factors which are now being considered in this new model of detection. In detection system, the only issue is that the feedback mechanism, the signal goes, but the signal, when it comes back, that kind of feedback mechanism is not there. The users are very less, currently only around 44,000, and it's reaching around 1 lakh shortly. So issue in that system is that very clearly with which Roy Saab and Dilip ji has brought in, community has not been brought into consideration. So probably if that system would have been given, clearly that hands in the form of community, their training, that if this signal comes in your village, whether it comes back with the detection of fire or not. So that is one part. The second part, I think, which I won't go into details what can be done, but I will definitely focus more on the study part, is important area which we discussed here. And I'm glad that that point was also mentioned by Mandvi, that, let's look at the health aspect of this. WHO has very clearly said that 600 million trees are chopped down annually to make cigarettes, and 84 million tons of CO2 emissions are released into atmosphere. And 22 billion liters of water is used to make cigarettes. So that's one important linkage which we have to establish, whether we have to go ahead with the tendu patta collection, or we have to go for sustainable forestry, which was indicated here in this discussion, that regeneration and other related aspects are to be taken, where again communities' participation is equally important. States have started with benefit sharing, but it is more inclined towards contractors. I think in Madhya Pradesh, they have started a good way of benefit sharing, where money is now, larger part of the money which is collected through NTFP collection is going to community. But in other states, it's more contractor focused. They're getting more money. And there are deterrents, but deterrents don't, in case of forest and management or in environment, deterrents are, we haven't seen it. It's all awareness and your ownership, which brings more changes rather than deterrent aspects. I think the important in this case is, that, for example, tobacco, there is a study and it has come out very clearly that 90% of Indian adults know that tobacco is bad for health. Now, if tobacco is bad for health, should we encourage tendu collection or the BD preparation or the cigarette? So that's alternative livelihood. When we are talking, I think we should talk about these things and the market interventions. We spoke about carbon market, and I think that's one area where we should link it up, because the decision of bringing this, despite this tobacco farming, and there's another important fact which I just wanted for the benefit of our colleagues and get their, that is farming of tobacco. So it contributes 1% of the GDP as per the study, and the direct health expenditure on treating tobacco-related disease only accounts for 5.3% of total health spending in India. So they see the comparison. If we bring health, probably we should totally discourage, but decision in democratic form in India is slightly tough. So we should explore possibility of bringing market intervention, which is very important. And I think carbon market is growing. I have seen now the companies like Nestle and others are moving towards sustainable products. So even on the cigarette side, sustainable cigarettes, how. And so those kind of aspects are coming in. So why not we talk about sustainable forestry and sustainable forest management from the perspective of tendu. On forest fire, I think we all know there are intricacies on reporting and the economic loss of fire. Disincentive within the departments are there. So, and there's no focus on prevention part. There's no focus on post-fire management. So those are issues which I think this needs a separate discussion as well. But these are issues, and I think going forward, we need to have a social and health angle very important in this, as Chandra pointed out. That triangle is needed to be discussed. Market mechanism has to be brought in, so that at least if we discourage this tendu, and communities have to give some alternative where they should head for. I'll stop here, Chandra, for the time.
Thank you, Piyush. Before, again, one question from you. See, I had the chance of going through that report. I remember talking to you also when I was writing my column on Australian forest fire. There are some very concrete recommendations that World Bank gave to Government of India on forest fire. If you'd like to mention one or two of them for the benefit of the audience.
I think that's very important. And another point which I just wanted, and your study is timely for that, Chandra, and that is that Government of India is now taking those steps forward. And one step was, that Forest Department alone can't do forest fire management, and they should have some kind of collaboration with other departments, and that is disaster management authorities and disaster management departments. So one step which recently Prime Minister has announced that we should do all those 23 to 26 districts which are fire-prone districts, there should be a bigger project which is under preparation. Consultation and stakeholder engagements have started. I participated in one of their panel discussion in the first week of May. So I think we should also engage, and I will definitely bring this study also to their reference, which they are preparing now extensively for India, and where this aspect of benefit sharing and mechanisms, incentive mechanism needs to be brought in, because the focus out there is not this. Focus out there is, again, it's management, and that's more on the
I think we have momentarily lost Piyush in this conversation. I'll get back to him later. But last but not the least, Mr. Upadhyay, Sanjay, your comments looking forward, please.
Thank you, Chandra. First of all, congratulations to you and your team, Mandvi and Praveen, for that study. I guess it's a fact which is well known and it got sort of endorsed by your study. The question that comes really is the state ignorant about it? Don't they know this already? And if they know it, is there a design to it? Does the legal frame addresses it? Does the policy frame addresses it or not? I think that's the real query. And when one looks at the law itself, I mean, right from 1865 to 1878 to 1927 archaic law that we follow, fire has been an important part there even. So if you look at the Forest Act, for example, of 1927, it really talks about not only the punishments, but also talks about seasonality. And that seasonality and the exception to that, the forest officer has been given the discretion to notify such seasons and act with his prudence about that particular area. Now, the trouble is, while we have the provision and the space, whether the forest officer is actually notifying those seasons or actually acting upon that provision is the real question. Even provisions like, your exercise of forest rights will be suspended, of pasture, of forest produce will be suspended in case you set fire to a reserve forest. These are more in theory than actually in practice. Because again, these are very, very strong punitive measures. But I think as Piyush said that, deterrence is not really working in this country. But we do have that provision. And it gets sort of more diffused when you start framing right-based laws like the Forest Rights Act or the PESA, which is the provision of Panchayat to extension to Scheduled Areas Act. Because here you're talking about granting ownership two communities, two gram sabhas, two forest dwelling scheduled tribes, and other traditional forest dwellers. So when it comes to a framework which is very right based versus a very command and control punitive measure, there is an apparent conflict. And I think that's where the system does not seem to work a lot. The other very interesting thing that we found out while preparing for this is that the onus of proving a forest offense, actually, as far as fire is concerned, is actually not with the accused. It is with the state. And therefore, you actually have to follow the Evidence Act to actually prove who lit the forest. And I think that is a very important question, because you're talking about areas where there's very little access of the state and more of the community. So to prove an offense is a big issue. And I think these are important things, because if you look at the Forest Act, the provision or the onus is on the state. But if you look at the Wildlife Act, the onus is actually on the accused. So when you're talking about different sets of areas like a protected area, the entire game changes. I think these are very, very important details that we normally miss when we are looking at our legal framework. Of course, there are standard provisions which says, causing fire is prohibited, etc. All the protected areas or all kinds of forests. But there are incentive mechanisms also which we have not used. We have always gone on the command and control regime. But there are incentive framework within the law which talks about rewards, which talks about court-based rewards, which talks about state-based rewards of actually creating a preventive framework. But we have not used that very often. And I think these are things that we need to really work, because the problem is well known, it is manifested quite well, but do we have a framework that can address it is where we need to really put our mind to. When it comes to the apparent conflict which I mentioned between the Indian Forest Act and the Wildlife Act and the Forest Rights Act and the PESA, I think that the tension about rights versus conservation needs to really be teased out, because it all boils down to how are we managing our forests. And when we talk about managing our forests, the working plan, which is the legal document now, the management plan, which is also a semi-legal document now, the conservation and management plan that you create on the Forest Rights Act, the joint forest management micro plans that we create, which is not a legal document, when all these planning tools merge with each other in the same space, how are we addressing the issue of forest fire becomes very important. And, I'm not even getting into the Indian Penal Code, etc., and the National Disaster Management Act, which I think Pish also alluded to. If you look at the NDMA Act itself, you'll find there are institutional mechanisms to address this. But again, how many people really know that, when it comes to forest fires? You'll be surprised, we have a number of forest policies. You have the National Forest Policy talking about forest fires. You have the National Policy on Disaster Management Act. You have a very, very detailed document called Forest Fires and Disaster Management from the NIDM, which is the National Institute of Disaster Management. You have a very, very important document called the Forest Fire Management Global Best Practices by NDMA. But all these are in silos, unfortunately. I don't know how many foresters have read this or the other way around. I think these are the real issues. I don't know how many of you are aware that the National Green Tribunal took this whole issue of forest fires in Uttarakhand for quite some time, almost a year and a half. And then finally it resulted in something called the National Action Plan on Forest Fire in 2018, which was prepared by the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And typically NGT, with no disrespect, they form a committee. And that committee is very foral in that sense, because MOEF is there, CPCB is there, the Wildlife Institute of India is there, the NDMA is there, the ICFR is there, the Forest Survey of India is there, the National Remote Sensing is there, all the PCCFs of all the states are there. The trouble is, do these committees deliver? And I think that's where the problem is, because we always have this very fancy institutional optics, if I may use the word. But I want to therefore end with a very small quote by NIDM itself, which says, fire is a very good servant, but a very bad master. So thank you, Chandra, for this opportunity. I hope I'll be able to answer some questions as well. Thank you.
In fact, there are a number of questions from audience that is there, and I would take that first, frankly. And one of them is, one question is on Campa. We are talking about large amount of money under Campa now. Okay. And therefore, Saurabh has asked a question to you specifically, Sanjay, in terms of how are we using, can we use Campa money? So that's one. And then there is a specific question to you about IPC 292 to 302. Okay. And can they be used for forest fire? So both questions to you.
Okay. So Campa, ideally, as you know, is largely for RDF, which is rehabilitation of degraded forest, to ANR, which is assisted natural regeneration. So directly, maybe no. But if you look at the overall forest management, Campa can always be tweaked and interpreted in a manner where you can use such money for forest management, because Forest Conservation Act itself, which I forgot to mention, gives an exception in its non-forestry definition to create fire lines and fire management systems. So the answer is yes, you can use it. As far as IPC is concerned, a more appropriate section would be section 268 and 285, which actually pertains to negligent conduct on fire and combustible matter, and also 435, which punishes people for willfully causing fire. So more of legal lessons later, but these are more direct questions, rather provisions which in the IPC which can be used. But nevertheless, what I was saying earlier was that you have the entire conservation laws which specifically talks about provisions on controlling forest fires. So you don't need a generic law. You have the specific law already.
I think Piyush wants to say something. Piyush?
Is it okay now? Is it okay?
Yeah, it is okay.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. So I think I just wanted to confirm what Sanjay said. Campa are being used now. Odisha is one state which I have personally visited and seen that, for the fire line clearances and for buying equipments, they have already used Campa money, and they have prepared a shadow working plan to work in particular few villages where the forest fire is really, and those villages which are vulnerable to forest fire. So that is one. Second, on reporting, I think Sanjay made a very good point, and that's what it's always under reporting, because accused is on the other side of the table. So what he has to prove, so he doesn't have to prove. He or she will simply say, the area of fire covered was less, and this was not done at the behest of someone. So it was, so those kind of things are really typical to forest department, which needs to be taken care when we are moving further on the management of forest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I think Dilip ji is leaving in 5 minutes. So I wanted his last comments before he leaves. Dilip ji?
Yeah.
आपका last comment.
Yes. बोलिए.
So, एक दो सवाल है आपसे लोगों ने पूछा. There are a few questions that people have asked you. One is that, one Sagar is asking that, can agroforestry, on private agricultural land be a solution to tendu-induced forest fire?
In particularly because tendu are being collected from two areas. One that under forest, and second from the agricultural land, that is called in Bhari in my area. From the agriculture bunds, these plants are there. But my again question, whatever origin may be of the forest fire, that's the question is about the management of the forest fire.
Okay.
Management to be done only at the level of from where it initiates, and that requires, because again we are talking about where are the fund provision and budgetary provisions for this control of the forest fires. Okay, Campa have enough money. Campa funds are collected from the diversion of the forest for that cause, because there is a specific cost for building a Campa fund. And then why not this entire amount in Campa to be spent only on the conservation management? And again I just raise the same question, because we are experienced, because of good practices of this banning of the bush cutting and community control over the forest, that our entire area has come up very luxuriantly, even adding to the yield of the tendu, and not only tendu, but so also other species of diverse variety in my area and many areas, because one of my cluster that is in the tiger reserve area, this is a corridor of between Nabega and Nagzira. So we have seen a good activity of wildlife, and people say that we don't have any harm from the wildlife. Simply, we just support us to use some barbed wire, support us to use some protective fencing to their agriculture. Those are some examples I would like to share. And people where they are staying, let them stay there, but make them trustful and confident that they are the real partner in the entire conservation management of the forest. People should not be treated as a mere daily wage earner in the name of the partner in the participative management. That is the requirement. If people say that we are going to control fire, and second thing, whosoever they are there, particularly those are the trader, those are the major role players. Again, I am asking this question because Sanjay is here. How many convictions are there for the violation of rules? Why we are making that condition a tender condition in the tender? We are talking about conservation oriented management in 2022, started in 1988, and again we are putting the same condition: allow pruning. We don't understand what is the impact of the continued pruning. Simple pruning of the material. The forest department has to alter all the practices and put a ban on such practices, which are causing harm to the forest management. Thank you. I am just leaving.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Namaskar. Thank you. Now I have question which I think both Anish and Piyush can answer. And basically the question is that, one is forest department, but what are your ideas of involving community? I mean to say, people say, let's involve community. But what does it mean in actual practice? How do you involve community? Do you pay them as a forest fire fighter? Or is it that you are expecting them to do things on their own? So can you put a little bit more effort to explain to us, what does it mean to involve community in forest fire management? Anish and then Piyush.
Okay. See, punishment doesn't work often. It's the incentives that work. And that we have seen in several economic models where if government decides to provide certain incentives through certain programs, we call them schemes, but in a positive light. If we provide those schemes where in Maharashtra, at least in the corridors that connect the tiger reserves, there is a Dr. Shama Prasad Janvan Yojana. Now through that villages which are part of the corridor are given us some amount of money. It is 2.5 million rupees given to the villager, to the village, because it is inside the corridor that connects to tiger reserves. And while that money is given, there is a quid pro quo, which means that they sign an MOU with the villager that they will be charai bandi, which means they will restrict the kind of grazing areas, they will not allow fires to come in, and that they will participate in natural regeneration programs. So these kind of relationships between the government and the communities are important. Convergence, so especially in these kind of villages which are really doubly marginalized, several other departments of the government have to come in. It's not just the problem of the forest department or the disaster management department. Everything, the economy of the nation is dependent on natural resources, and so therefore automatically the transport ministry, the energy ministry, and all those things come. And if you can talk about convergence, which means that through the micro plans of the villages, if money can be channelized in a transparent manner into the bank accounts of the villagers, then things will change. I think another thing which is actually doesn't come as it's not so straightforward, but I think decentralization of energy is an extremely important factor here. When I say energy, I'm talking about power. And when we say there are a lot of minor forest produce, and Dilip mentioned that, where are the alternatives? Are there any alternatives for to move away from tendu patta? Actually, the alternatives are not making sense at this point in time because the value add is not possible. So if you're selling a product that you get from nature, just as that product then it doesn't make economic sense because the energy to gain is not balancing out. So what we have to do is, if we are able to decentralize power, we will certainly see that a lot of alternatives currently could be bamboo, could be so many different things. And I listed down, just while somebody was talking, some 30 names of plants which are being used in different parts of the country. And so, we need to look at power as a very important conduit to moving away from this injurious profession that people are dragged into. Even if it is for a month and a half, it does have a huge cascading effect on the health of the nation. So that's one. And finally, I think payment for ecosystem services is also something that we have to understand. Say, many of these marginalized communities that are dependent on natural resources, especially low value products. So a tendu patta actually is a low value product when it comes to the person who's actually picking it, right? The money is made at a different level altogether. So to move away from these low value products, we have to think of payment for ecosystem services to break the chain. Now, what does that mean? So if I am a villager and if I am restricted in the kind of industries that I can indulge in because I am in a forest area, my opportunity cost needs to be compensated by the cities who are benefiting either from fresh air, which is difficult to measure, but water definitely is easy to measure. So if we can measure the value of the forest through the water that is consumed by individuals and also that are running the industry, that money can be a huge, and I'm talking about small amounts per person, it can be a huge incentive for marginalized communities, because those are the opportunity costs that we can compensate for. So I think it's not a straightforward answer as to how to involve, but at an immediate level, there have to be joint forest management committees which are more effective, and that can happen through money only. It cannot just happen because, because let us understand that whether we are living in an urban setup or inside a forest, there is this, always going to be the tragedy of commons that is going to play out, whether we are talking about big industrialists or marginalized communities. So we have to somehow make sure that there is enough for everybody. Only then can you have these perverse incentives of indulging into these kind of activities going down.
Okay. Thank you. Piyush, I think your inputs on will payment for ecosystem, or say, for example, carbon, work out in case of Tendu fire?
So I think clearly Anish has brought in PES, and that is very important. Payment on ecological services in Costa Rica and other places have worked very well in such where the most of the forest areas are with the private communities, and some of them have very low land holding. So what they have done is, water as a prime, if water is being supplied to the urban areas, then they should be paid for the protection of forest or the other ecological services which they are maintaining. So PES is a good alternative, but PES needs to be evolved in India. It hasn't gone very well so far. And I think in recent policies now, PES is being encouraged, and I think we should definitely work in this case of Tendu Patta also to explore that possibility. Second is, I think carbon market, for sure, I think carbon market will definitely come in this, because there is perceptions, it links with deforestation. For example, Tendu Patta, they are removing, so it is bringing deforestation. So if we talk and bring them in the area of afforestation and bringing more regeneration of those areas and give incentive exactly in the form of some money. It's not incentive for so that kind of models we have to definitely explore, Chandra. What we have in our study explored that what are current methods of community engagement forest department is doing and what we can incentivize further. So there were few listings which we done during those discussions or the study. One was public awareness. Second was, bringing them in meetings, public gatherings, school programs, one panchayat discussions, wages for clearing fires, and some monetary payments whenever there is a fire. So prevention activities. So I think they have been given, but they have given very marginally. For watch towers and watchers, they give them incentive, but that's also during particular period of season during forest fire. So what discussion took place and consultation at that time were that there should be more provisions of incentive, and that should be financial incentives. There should be more extension services. By extension services, what they were saying that, we talk about NTFP value chains, but it should be high-end value chain. Why we say only NTFP forest produce value chain? We should say high-end forest produce value chains. Agriculture has made quite a good effort in this. Forest should also have extension services and value chain linkages in their forest produce, and these NTFPs needs to be identified very clearly. And we just had in this discussion also, number of those things are possible. So I think that's very important. And secondly, if we are really bringing them for forest fire, I think the training on forest fire, giving them equipment to prevent forest fire. Generally, when there is fire, we bring communities and ask them to do it with a broom, which is general equipment which they use. So which is really disheartening in one sense. So it's important to strengthen them with the training, with the equipments. And important point which I left when you were asking, some kind of recommendation, and that was, intersectoral coordination. There are very good work which individual states are doing, but there's no sharing platform or monitoring mechanism whether these things are really bringing value. That is very important. And second is, whether community institutions have been strongly brought in this discussion and are contributing. One kind of study whether JFM has really benefited. So those kind of studies we recommended, and these were also there as part of the community interaction recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Piyush. Now, before I go to Pranay, and there are many questions which are related to tobacco, and I think Pranay is the right person to answer them. I would request Sanjay and PS Roy for their last comments. So Sanjay, I'll start with you, then I'll go to Dr. Roy.
Well, I don't have too many comments, last comments. I think one point that is coming out very clearly is how are we managing our forests? And when it comes to management, I think the planning tools become very important. And the array of planning tools that we have, which I mentioned in my talk, whether it's a micro plan, whether it's the conservation management under the FRA, whether it's the PESA plans, whether it is the working plan, whether it's the management plan under the Wildlife Act, I think we all need to really see the role of these kind of destructive practices and how it needs to be addressed head on. And whether we have the human resource and the material resource to deal with it. And I think that's where the real crux of the matter is. And if we can get that right, everything else will follow, whether it's alternatives to tendu patta, or whether it's reducing cigarette smoking people in the world, which is a huge task. But I think if we address the core issues, and the other thing is whether the legal frame needs to shift towards an incentivized frame, whether it's PES or whether it's other incentive-based models that we can join at the ground level. I think those are the things that works, and we need to also make sure that people on the ground understand these things. They are not to be taught, but they are to be co-opted and made sure that the work that they will do will actually bring in better livelihoods and better conservation outcomes. So I think these are the messages I would end my conversation with.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you very much, Dr. Roy.
Well, I think it was a very lively discussion, and I really got educated with many of the facts. I would say that forest fire, as mentioned by Anish, that have been there. It is part of a forest ecosystem about 3 decades back. Also, it was a part of forest management practices. But the climate change has brought this entire forest fire management as a major challenge for the forests and bioresources, biodiversity. Anish has made these points very clearly. I really appreciate he has gone into minute level, micro level, how this forest fire is changing the forest flora, and fauna, and also microbial flora in the soil. The second point which I would like to mention in the legal aspects, and I also like the comment which he made, that there are many legal frameworks and under which this control, Sanjay made it very clearly that this can be done. And actually the implementation at the ground level is actually has to be addressed more seriously, mainly because of the climate change scenario, because now we are reaching a tipping point. Climate change has brought us on a tipping point where the bioresources, species, human beings will survive. And it's very a fact of threat to the planet. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
No. So we are really thankful to you for joining this meeting and supporting this study. Now I will request Pranay I'll give the floor to Pranay. And before I give the floor, may I request all of us to open our camera? We would like to take one picture for all the panelists. Unfortunately, Dilipji is not here, but nevertheless. So please open your camera, and Mandvi or anyone can take a picture. So all of us are there. Done? Okay, thank you. Pranay, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chandra. I think in interest of time, I'm just going to be very quick with my comments. I think it is very clear from all the panelists that we're talking about planetary health. We're talking about human health. We're talking about species. We're talking about landscapes collapsing. We're talking about tipping points in climate. We are also talking, I want to talk about two aspects. I think I'll divide this into two clear parts. First, of course, is the massive public health effect that we see from tobacco use. We know that 7.7 lakh adult males die prematurely every year by smoking BDs. Now, BDs are the single most largest produced product in the country. At one time, there were 1.2 trillion BDs made. We made more BDs than staples or pins or anything of that kind. Think about it. 1.2 trillion is a huge number. But what has it resulted in is about, of course, as Mandvi mentioned, and of course, thank you, Anish, for also championing the cause that it is a massive public health effect that we face. But this perverse economics is something that needs to be disentangled. The product is made by the poorest of the poor, and it is meant for the poorest of the poor, and it kills the poorest of the poor, right? We know that from the E.S. Sarma first committee report on the 100 poorest districts of India, 77 of them were either tendu plucking or BD rolling or both, right? And clearly in the last 70, 80 years, none of these districts have come out of the poverty trap. What we know is that these poverty trapped villages or communities are the ones that fill the coffers of some of the richest families in India. And, of course, they are also very influential in political spheres. But I want to correct Anish a little here that, tendu plucking for using to make BDs is not a traditional practice. In fact, it arrived at the same time when cigarettes were being made. It was actually the first BD rolling workshop was set up around the same time when the first cigarette factory was being set up. So certainly, because tobacco is not native to India, as you know, it arrived, in the late 15th, early 16th century. It took a very long time for it to indigenize and become into what it is. It's taken a very long time, and this curve of it becoming part of our culture is something of a myth which everybody likes to perpetuate. So I just want to make it quite clear that it's neither traditional nor cultural for us, and certainly not indigenous as a practice to roll anything in a tendu patta, to roll tobacco, since it was not native. So I think that's the point that I want to make on the public health perspective. I just want to, I'm not an ecologist or certainly not as gifted as Anish and others, but I'll just make a couple of points that the intensive collection of tendu patta happened only when the sal forests were depleted. And this is a second story species. It in fact comes below Malotus and Bixa oleana. Tendu is not a light demander, but once it is offered that it's actually a wolf tree. It gains its crown and becomes into a bit of a shrubby tree. And that's what makes it even better for them to pluck, for tendu pluckers to pluck tendu. Now, the point I'm making here is that the burning regimes have come only post-independence in 40s and 50s and 60s, and got the legitimacy and the backing of the forest departments and everybody, and was made to look traditional because there were a handful of, like I said, influential merchant barons who actually control that whole narrative. I think, therefore, there are upstream and downstream effects which have been created, like just as Anish and Professor Roy and Piyush spoke about. I think I'm not going to talk about those because I think it's been very well elaborated by them. But like Professor Roy mentioned, I think emissions have a widespread effect. I think we are seeing there's a small contribution of tendu burning or forest floor burning to the Asian brown haze, and therefore the black carbon that goes in deposits in the snow covers, which also is a indirect way of creating a climate change effect. Now, that might be marginal. Of course, it's very, very tiny. It could well be under 1%. I don't know what the contribution is, but still is. And think about it, it's been happening for 70 years. And finally, I think the inspirational work of Dilip Bhai is, I think, commendable. And I think what I really appreciate is what Dilip Bhai has been able to showcase is that, his kind of work suggests that, forests now no longer need to be a source of carbon, but a sink of carbon, because that is the primary purpose of landscapes, of intact ecosystems. Forests, ponds, lakes, they are there to absorb carbon that comes from anthropogenic sources and, of course, from natural sources, including fires. But these are deliberate fires. What I think the conversation digressed into was that we were trying to look at ways in saying, if fires were to happen, we need to do this. Of course, that's a legitimate part, but the fact that we should be looking at an end game of forest fires that have been induced to produce tendu patta, I think is a perverse source of economics. And I think all of us agree on that. And finally, I just want to say this, that, we need to be looking at an end game, not only for tendu patta, but also looking at how we want to reach that end game by having a participatory measure at looking at rewilding India's forests, at looking at finding alternative livelihoods for communities who have been so far been taken away from that their original rights of extracting products that were useful for their survival and for their daily lives. I believe tendu patta extraction has been a huge distraction because it's been guided by political forces initially, Swadeshi movement to make beedis, and then it became a legitimate part to make it a poor man's smoke. I think that narrative has to change if India really wants to meet its health goals, planetary health goals, and largely its climate change goals. And of course, water and soil security in tow, which I think comes together with both public health and planetary health. So thank you so much, Chandrabhushan. I think this was a revitalizing discussion, and I really look forward to how this report is presented and accepted in the larger academic and policy spheres. And we always look forward to guidance from people like you and Piyush and Anish, and of course Sanjay is a luminary in environmental law. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pranay. Ultimately, this discussion has to be much more louder. I think this is the first step, the first paper that we are going to publish. You're right. We will publish it in a peer-reviewed journal, but we will also bring out state fact sheets, and do some discussion at the state level. But going ahead, we will also work on alternatives, because I think, I remember this word. Actually, Piyush told me, if I'm not wrong, that do not call them as minor forest produce. They are not minor forest produce. We generally call NTFP minor forest produce. They're actually, if value addition is done, they are the major forest produce, because timber is not something that Indian forests are going to give it to us. And NTFP, if value addition, processing, community engagement is done well, they will be the major source of wealth for the forest dwelling communities. So we will work on the alternatives as well, because that's a big area of work where effort needs to be put. Already a lot of work is happening. maybe we will be providing more knowledge, support, research in this area. But it has been a fascinating discussion. I want to thank my colleagues for working on this, Mandvi, Prerna, Praveen, for doing this report. A lot of work to be done on this further. But to all the panelists, it has been a fascinating discussion, learned a lot, and I hope that audiences, the attendees also got a lot out of it. So thank you very much. And with this, I will close the meeting today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.